A young girl with shimmering silver hair clutches her doll, her wide blue eyes filled with a desperate hope. She tightly clasps her hands together, offering a silent, heartfelt prayer to the heavens. Kneeling in the center of a grand cathedral, she begs a massive dragon statue to grant her wish and return her father to her. Her long, crystalline hair spills across the floor as she pleads for the same protection her father once provided. Deep within the shadows of the altar, a tiny, real dragon rouses from its slumber and lets out a massive yawn. The small creature peeks curiously around a stone pillar, alerted by the girl's presence. With her eyes closed in solemn devotion, she further asks for the burden of her divinity to be stripped away. Her eyes suddenly snap open as a sharp sound echoes through the silent hall. She gasps in pure shock, finding the miniature dragon staring back at her from the top of the altar. 10 years pass in the blink of an eye, and the girl has transformed into a radiant young woman, draped in a gown of blue and gold. Despite her beauty, her gaze has grown cold and hollow, haunted by years of suffering. A woman leans in with a venomous smile, mockingly promising that her future husband will be kind despite his age. She cruelly lifts the girl's chin, reminding her that she is merely destined to be the man's 8th wife. The girl closes her eyes in silent resignation, forced to endure the woman's taunts. Later, she follows her mother through a lavish corridor, calling out in a final attempt to be heard. She reaches out to grab her mother's sleeve, desperate for just one moment of genuine conversation. Her mother violently smacks her hand away, looking back with a face twisted by cold disdain. The woman narrows her eyes, ordering the girl to be grateful for the sacrifices made for her sake. The girl's strength fails her, and she collapses as the weight of her family's betrayal sinks in. She suddenly stands tall, shouting her defiance against being sold to a 50-year-old man at only 17. Her father looms over her with a look of pure rage, demanding her absolute silence. He sneers at her, calling her a jinx who has brought nothing but misfortune to their house. He raises a heavy hand, ready to strike her down to maintain his control. The girl looks away in exhausted silence, her spirit pushed to its absolute breaking point. Her father holds her mother's hand aloft, reminding the girl that her face is the only reason they received a fortune. Her mother watches with a chilling, detached expression, viewing her own daughter as nothing more than a business transaction. She flatly states that if the girl refuses to go tomorrow, they will simply tie her up and throw her into the carriage. Realizing she is truly alone, the girl forced a pained, hollow smile and agrees to the arrangement. Suddenly, a surge of dark, violet energy erupts from her body, causing her to scream in agony. Inside a moving carriage, a maid recoils in terror as the shadowy flames begin to consume the interior. The panicked servant scrambles toward the door, desperate to escape the witch beside her. The girl is trapped in a vortex of dark power, while phantom voices scream for her to burn and die. Outside, the sky is torn asunder as a magnificent white dragon descends, sending the escort into a frenzy. The soldiers abandon their posts and flee in terror as the dragon's roar shakes the earth. The girl looks out the carriage window, her eyes wide with bewilderment at the sudden chaos. She frantically tries to open the door, but the heavy latch refuses to move. She realizes with horror that her parents locked her in like a prisoner to ensure their payout. As the dark flames lick at the walls, she wonders if she will survive long enough to see what happens next. She freezes as she catches a scent on the wind that feels strangely familiar yet terrifying. Slowly, she turns her head toward the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. A massive, slitted golden eye fills the entire frame of the window, staring directly into her soul. A colossal white dragon looms over the girl, its breath frosting the air as it claims her as its bride. She gazes into the creature's crystalline eye, seeing her own terrified reflection mirrored in its massive gaze. Memories of her past resurface, flashing back to the cruel boy who constantly belittled her lineage. She remembers being cornered and tormented by other children who viewed her as nothing more than a lowly slave. The image of a discarded doll on the floor serves as a painful reminder of her stolen childhood. Back in the present, she cringes near the dragon's massive talons, feeling the weight of her helplessness. A small, winged version of the dragon hovers in the air, contemplating the lack of divine power in this human girl. The miniature beast narrows its piercing blue eyes, deciding to move on from its observation. In another memory, the arrogant boy spots the small creature and wonders what such a strange bird is doing there. A sinister smirk plays across his lips as he prepares to strike. He holds a heavy stone in his palm, ready to launch a cruel attack. The stone finds its mark, pinning the small dragon to the ground with a sudden, forceful impact. The girl watches in horror as the tiny creature struggles against a magical binding stone. She reaches out her hands, desperate to intervene in the unfair torment. Risking everything, she lunges forward to shield the small dragon in a protective embrace. She stares down at the creature, captivated by its ethereal and mysterious presence. The dragon stares back, its expression softening as it acknowledges her unexpected kindness. However, a cruel girl nearby whispers a wicked plan to frame her for any trouble that follows. She draws a sharp dagger from her belt, the cold steel glinting with lethal intent. The bully holds the blade to the girl's throat, demanding she sever the small creature's tail. Tears stream down her face as she refuses to harm the innocent being. In a fit of rage, the bully grabs her by her long, silver hair. She insults the girl's worth, treating her like an object to be discarded. With a swift, cruel motion, the blade slices through her locks. She collapses to the floor, Her spirit shattered as she watches the small dragon fall beside her. As she lies broken on the cold ground, she reaches out one last time, mourning her inability to protect another life. Suddenly, a dark, pulsing energy begins to manifest around her eye, reacting to her profound despair. A massive explosion of shadowy mist erupts from her, sending her tormentors screaming away in pure terror. A single tear falls as the darkness consumes her vision. When she finally opens her eyes again, the world feels drastically different. She finds herself lying in the arms of a powerful, silver-haired man who radiates an ancient aura. He looks down at her with a calm, steady gaze and asks if she has finally awakened. She notices his long, flowing silver hair, which feels hauntingly familiar. The realization hits her like a lightning bolt. Those piercing blue eyes are the exact same as the dragon that took her. The sun rises over a majestic castle, its golden spires reaching toward a clear and peaceful sky. A curious ginger cat pauses at the edge of a garden basin, mesmerized by the movement within the water. Beneath the surface, dark fish dart through the ripples, completely unaware of the feline predator watching from above. The girl's reflection shimmers in the water as she realizes with a jolt that she is trapped in a realm far from the human world. Panic sets in as she searches the grand room, wondering if any other humans have survived in this dragon's lair. Her breath catches when the silver-haired man looms over her, his presence both overwhelming and entirely alien. He leans in with an unsettling, clinical curiosity, tasting the salt from her tears as if examining a rare biological specimen. Terrified by his beastly nature, she fears she is nothing more than a snack for this ancient predator. He watches her every move with a cold, analytical intensity, trying to understand the fragile creature before him. Overwhelmed by the sheer terror of her situation, the girl finally succumbs to exhaustion and loses consciousness. Undeterred by her faint, the man continues his strange, technical inspection of her physical state. He notes with a hint of disappointment that human tears lack the crystalline value of the treasures found among sea dwellers. Despite her perceived biological flaws, he reaches out to touch her face, deciding she is a specimen worth keeping. He leans down to catch her scent, cataloging every detail of his new human acquisition. He pulls her into a firm embrace, his mind already spinning a web of a shared future for them both. In his mind's eye, he envisions a grand, ceremonial union to solidify his eternal claim over her. A sudden knock at the door bursts his bubble, leaving the dragon man fuming at the poorly timed interruption. His companion, Anthony, enters the room and immediately covers his eyes, exasperated by the dragon's total lack of human modesty. Anthony insists that he must at least attempt to follow human customs now that he has brought a guest into their home. The dragon scoffs at the lecture on etiquette, his patience wearing thin as he questions the purpose of the visit. The mood turns grave as Anthony reports that the trolls have launched a fresh, violent assault on their borders. All traces of playfulness vanish from the dragon's face, replaced by a lethal warrior's focus. With practiced ease, he reaches for his massive, curved blade, ready to spill blood to defend his territory. He stands as a pillar of raw power, his physique hardened by centuries of relentless combat. Anthony looks on in silence, knowing that the upcoming battle will be swift and decisive under his friend's command. Clad in heavy combat gear, the dragon leads a massive army into the heart of the chaotic conflict. On the front lines, the warriors struggle to maintain their formation against the overwhelming monstrous horde. Amidst the smoke and steel, the dragon commander surveys the carnage with a cold, tactical eye. He unleashes a devastating surge of magical energy, clearing the path forward with a single, brutal strike. Hours later, the girl stares out at the moonlit sky, weighing her chances of escape while the master of the house is away. A sudden voice behind her makes her heart stop, as she realizes she isn't as alone as she had hoped. The dragon stands in the doorway, his elegant clothes drenched in the dark evidence of his victory on the battlefield. He stalks toward her, his heavy tail dragging across the floor like a predator returning to its prize. He reaches out with a blood-stained hand, demanding her full and undivided attention. Looming over her, he forces her to look at him, demanding a vow of loyalty that she isn't ready to give. She recalls the agonizing humiliation of being labeled a blasphemous witch, forced to endure a harsh scrubbing by those who feared her very existence. The crushing weight of her long imprisonment remains etched into her weary eyes, a silent testament to years spent in total isolation. Memories of her childhood bullies fleeing in absolute terror as dark flames erupted around her continue to haunt her subconscious. Her grim reflections are suddenly interrupted as the commander leans in close, demanding to know what thoughts are racing through her mind. He towers over her with an intense, clinical curiosity, studying her features as if she were a rare specimen from another world. The sheer proximity of the ancient warrior leaves her paralyzed, her breath hitching as she struggles to maintain her composure. With blood-stained fingers, he lifts her chin and delivers a startling ultimatum, demanding that she declare her love for him. Overwhelmed by the absurdity of the request, she instinctively shields her mouth, her mind racing to find a safe response. She watches his unreadable expression with bated breath, terrified that a single misplaced word might result in her being devoured. Sensing her internal panic, The commander abruptly drops the subject and decides that addressing her hunger is the more immediate priority. Her delicate footwear clicks rhythmically against the polished floor as she is led away from the suffocating tension of the room. He maintains a firm, unwavering grip on her hand while guiding her through the moonlit grandeur of the palace corridors. She looks up at his broad shoulders with wide, uncertain eyes, wondering if this promise of a meal is truly a gesture of kindness. Her mind drifts back to the days of her confinement, where she was often left famished and forgotten by her captors. The dark, oppressive energy of her past life felt like a living shadow that refused to let her move forward. She vividly remembers watching a cook from the doorway, a starving spectator to a world of warmth she was never allowed to touch. Tears had streamed down her face when she finally tasted a simple bowl of soup, a meal that felt like the greatest luxury she had ever known. Returning to the present, she follows the blood-spattered trail of his cloak, noting the heavy, predatory grace of his movements. The contrast between his massive, battle-hardened frame and her fragile stature is highlighted as they navigate the silent halls. For a fleeting moment, she begins to wonder if this intimidating figure might actually be less monstrous than she initially feared. Her curiosity is piqued as they reach the kitchen, and the commander begins to prepare what he considers a proper meal. The fragile peace is instantly shattered when he holds out a massive slab of raw, dripping meat for her to consume. Her eyes widen in pure horror as she realizes the fundamental disconnect between her human needs and his dragon instincts. Regret washes over her, forever believing that a bloodthirsty warrior could truly understand the concept of mercy or care. She lowers her head in despair, her chin trembling as the reality of her situation sinks in once again. Summoning every ounce of her remaining courage, she softly asks if she might be permitted to cook the meat herself. The memory of eating like a human one last time fuels her determination to maintain some semblance of her own identity. However, the physical toll of her stress becomes too much to bear, causing her legs to wobble and give way. She desperately tries to steady herself, her entire body shaking under the intense pressure of the commander's watchful gaze. He reaches out with a steady, blood-stained hand, his fingers brushing against her silver hair in a silent assessment of her condition. Noticing her uncontrollable tremors, he pulls her into a firm, protective hold from behind to ensure she doesn't collapse to the floor. The dragon's sudden embrace sends her heart into a frantic rhythm as she freezes in place. Her fingers grip the table white-knuckled, unable to hide the physical manifestation of her fear. She recoils internally as he leans in close, the instinct to flee screaming in the back of her mind. Amidst the terror, a flicker of a different realization begins to cloud her eyes. Memories of a cold, isolated past resurface, reminding her of the crushing weight of loneliness. Slowly, the violent tremors in her hands begin to subside as she regains a sliver of composure. The dragon notices the shift, tightening his hold as the girl finally stops shaking against him. A subtle, satisfied smirk plays on his lips, convinced that his presence is what finally brought her peace. Outside, a brilliant full moon hangs over the estate, casting a cold glow over their tense dinner meeting. She looks down at the culinary project she worked so hard to complete for him. The final result is a perfectly prepared hamburger steak, topped with a fried egg and garnished with care. She glances at him sideways, wondering if this ancient being actually intends to consume human food. Before she can explain the etiquette, he reaches out to grab the hot meal with his bare hand. Panicked, she cries out for him to stop, her eyes wide at his lack of basic dining knowledge. He moves with predatory speed, catching her mid-motion and pulling her back into his personal space. She stares at her own hand, shocked that she had the audacity to actually grab onto him. Embarrassment washes over her as she quickly withdraws, trying to maintain a professional distance. Taking a deep breath, she decides to push past the awkwardness to ensure he eats properly. She picks up a spoon and firmly instructs him on the proper technical use of cutlery. With a nervous blush, she offers him a small portion, prompting him to open wide for the taste test. He stares at the offered utensil with intense curiosity, his eyes locked onto her every move. He slowly leans forward, accepting the foreign concept of being fed. The dragon takes the bite, carefully sampling the complex flavors of her cooking. He swallows the morsel in silence, processing the unfamiliar human texture. She watches him with bated breath, desperate to know if her efforts met his high standards. For a moment, he remains still, his expression unreadable as he evaluates the dish. A genuine, predatory grin breaks across his face as he declares the meal absolutely great. Relief floods her features, her eyes shimmering with the rare joy of a successful task. She continues the demonstration, meticulously feeding him until he is satisfied. Within minutes, the heavy cooking pot is scraped completely clean. She stands over the empty vessel, realizing she was so focused on him that she forgot to eat herself. He doesn't give her a moment's rest, immediately closing the distance to demand more of her attention. She tries to excuse herself to handle the cleanup, but he refuses to let her leave his side. He leans over her shoulder with an overwhelming intensity, completely ignoring the chores at hand. He cuts straight to his ultimate demand, pressuring her to confess her loyalty and love. Realizing her confusion, he decides he must be the one to set the technical standard for their bond. His gaze turns sharp and focused, preparing to deliver a life-altering declaration. Deep within her psyche, a dark, mocking presence laughs at the very concept of affection. The air suddenly turns heavy as a chilling energy begins to leak from her trembling form. A violent surge of dark power erupts, swirling around them as her inner trauma reacts to his words. A massive rumble shakes the very foundation of the castle, as golden arcane rings ignite across the sky. Anthony bursts through the doorway, his face twisted in shock as he demands to know what triggered the Citadel's ultimate magical defense. His predatory, slitted eyes narrow to a sharp point, while he frantically scans the room for the source of the disturbance. Inside the kitchen, Erik remains seated in a cold silence while the girl kneels before him, her white dress scorched and ruined by the dark energy surge. Anthony clenches his teeth, realizing the sheer magnitude of the power the girl just unleashed. Erik hides his face in his hand to compose himself while Anthony questions if the girl has any control over her volatile divinity at all. Without a word of comfort, Erik stands and walks past her, leaving the girl trembling on the cold floor. She stares down at her shaking hands, gripped by the terrifying certainty that she will be executed for her lack of control. Anthony looms over her, his dragon tail swaying with a sharp edge as he mentions the strange human books Erik has been studying. A sly, mocking grin spreads across Anthony's face as he asks her if she still fails to understand the gravity of her position. The girl's eyes shimmer with disbelief as she learns that Erik ignored the protests of all other dragons just to bring her here. She forces herself to stand, deciding that overthinking is useless and her only path forward is to keep moving. Anthony watches her retreat from the room, his tall silhouette framed against the doorway as she walks away. With a smug expression, he informs her that she is now officially recognized as the dragon's bride. A grand portrait of a stoic, ancient ruler serves as a reminder of the heavy legacy she is now part of. She sprints through the palace halls, the weight of Anthony's words echoing in her mind with every step. She stops to catch her breath, her face softening as she tries to process the idea of a dragon actually feeling love. Anthony catches up to her and offers a slight bow, claiming that Erik will give her the entire world if she simply says she loves him. She looks away with a troubled expression, unable to fully trust the advisor's honeyed words. As she wanders through the glowing corridor, she asks herself why a powerful being like Erik would ever care for someone like her. Doubt continues to gnaw at her heart, as she finds no logical reason to believe in such a sudden affection. She eventually finds Erik hunched over by a window, looking surprisingly small and exhausted despite his power. Her heart skips a beat when Erik turns to her with a sharp, intimidating threat to devour her where she stands. He glares at her with piercing blue eyes, frustrated that she spent her time chatting with Anthony instead of following him. Erik gestures for her to approach him, demanding her presence so they can finally speak without interruption. She takes a hesitant step forward, her heels clicking softly as she enters his immediate reach. Erik pulls her into a sudden embrace, insisting that she should ask him directly if she truly wants to know his heart. He pulls back just enough to look her in the eye, his voice dropping as he mentions his exhaustion and the need for rest. The morning light spills into the quiet, opulent bedroom, illuminating the aftermath of a long, stressful night. Erik lies motionless on the bed, his silver hair fanning out as he finally succumbs to a deep slumber. The girl lies beside him, her gaze fixed on his sleeping face as she tries to decipher the enigma of the Dragon Prince. In his sleep, Erik leans into her, whispering that she is the very first person to ever stay by his side. As they rest together among the scattered floral patterns, she notices a strange, lingering sensation in her chest after the dark flames touched her. Erik's eyes slowly open, his gaze drifting as he begins to stir from his rest. The girl finally closes her eyes, drifting into a much-needed and peaceful sleep of her own. Erik looks over at her sleeping form with a quiet, curious observation of her peaceful expression. He notices that the bottom of her dress is completely shredded and blackened from the earlier energy blast. Acting with practical concern for her comfort, he lifts the damaged fabric to assess how much of the garment needs to be replaced. He concludes that a fresh change of clothes is necessary for her, and prepares to find her something suitable to wear. A gentle touch stirs the girl from her deep slumber. She feels a strange tickling sensation against her skin. Her eyes snap open as she finally regains consciousness. Erik stands over her, holding a delicate white garment with total confusion. She stares at the Dragon Prince, realizing her scorched dress is gone. The two share a bewildered moment over the sudden wardrobe change. Fabric slips as she realizes her current state of undress. Erik explains that he removed her ruined clothing because it was an eyesore. A wave of embarrassment washes over her face. Erik examines the undergarment, puzzled by its technical function. Panicked, she lunges forward to hide herself against him. She desperately tries to explain the purpose of the intimate apparel. Erik listens intently, processing this new human information. He leans in close, curious about how to assist with the dressing process. Their private moment is shattered by aggressive banging on the door. Anthony's silhouette looms at the entrance, interrupting the morning. The girl watches as Erik deals with the annoying intruder. Seizing the distraction, she bolts out of the room to escape the chaos. A tiny, glowing fairy suddenly flutters into her path. She is overcome with awe at the mythical creature from her storybooks. The cheerful fairy introduces himself as Anthony's partner, Silly. Silly asks the girl what her heart truly desires right now. She pauses, pondering if she truly wants to return to a home with no one waiting. She pulls back her hood, stepping into her reality. Now fully dressed in an elegant gown, she prepares to face the day. She makes her way toward the grand dining hall for breakfast. Inside, Anthony and Rhodey complain about Erik's savage behavior. She hesitates at the doorway, watching the three dragons interact. Rhodey spots her and offers a friendly greeting. Erik's intense gaze immediately locks onto her. He pulls her close, complimenting how the new dress suits her perfectly. Erik barks orders at the others to prepare a meal for his guests. The other dragons whisper about Erik's lack of social grace. Erik shuts them down with a terrifying cold glare. The advisors instantly cower, begging for mercy from the prince. Erik rises from his seat to address the group. He shifts his focus to the political threats looming over them. With absolute certainty, Erik declares his final decision to marry the human girl. The meal begins with a delicate bite of steak, but the conversation is about to turn far heavier than the food on the plate. Erik's companions don't hold back, bluntly questioning if he's already finalized the physical bonds of his marriage with a human. Erik pauses, his expression blank as he wonders what on earth consummated even means in this context. The silence at the table is deafening as Erik's total lack of social knowledge leaves his friends in a state of utter shock. Rhodey explodes in disbelief, unable to comprehend how someone could cross the world for a bride without knowing the basic terminology of a union. The awkward moment is interrupted as the bride enters the room, cautiously carrying a fresh tray of food for the group. She tentatively offers the prepared meal, hoping to fulfill her role and stay useful in this strange new household. Erik's demeanor shifts instantly as he looks at her, requesting that she feed him manually just as they did the day before. The request catches her completely off guard, sending a flash of surprise across her face as she processes his words. His advisors can only watch in annoyance, lamenting that the powerful prince has suddenly become so dependent on his bride's help for a simple meal. The dish is meticulously prepared, featuring a high-protein steak and egg combination fit for a dragon's appetite. She carefully lifts a forkful of food, maintaining a steady hand as she assists Erik with the technical task of eating. High above, the massive eyes of other dragons peer through the windows, judging the tiny human for her perceived weakness and small stature. Feeling the weight of their predatory gaze, she cowers slightly, overwhelmed by the sheer number of dragons surrounding her. Erik immediately senses her distress and pulls her into the protective curve of his arm, declaring that he will shield her from any threat. He gently tilts her head up, forcing her to focus on him rather than the terrifying eyes watching from the shadows. With her full attention secured, Erik accepts the bite of food she offers, his gaze remaining intense and focused. Once the meal concludes, Erik takes her hand firmly to guide her to the next secure location in the palace. As they walk down the grand hallway, she struggles to understand what her true purpose and standing are in his life. She reflects on his confusing kindness, how he provides her with fine clothing and sustenance despite his intimidating nature. The internal conflict is exhausting, leading her to wonder if the stress of the Dragon Kingdom is finally making her go crazy. However, as she looks at their feet moving in sync, she realizes she somehow doesn't feel as scared as she did before. They reach a set of massive, ornate doors where Erik stops and instructs her to take a step back for her own safety. Erik activates a glowing blue crystal mechanism to unlock the ancient seal on the private chamber. As the doors open, he brings her close to ensure she isn't startled by the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. She finds herself leaning into his side for support, realizing that her body is naturally seeking his warmth in the cold hall. She catches herself and tries to maintain a proper social distance, though her hand still nervously tugs at his sleeve. Erik leans in close, his sharp gaze questioning why she would suddenly pull away from his side. He places a hand near her face to keep her steady, observing her reaction with clinical, intense precision. His sheer presence remains overwhelming, reminding her that he is still a creature of immense and terrifying power. He turns his attention back to the room, assuring her that this area is a safe zone where no other dragonkin will dare to enter. He explains that he has urgent duties to attend to while gesturing toward the massive, decorative eggs kept in the chamber. Erik notes that the surrounding environment and the eggs themselves seem to react positively to her presence. With a final instruction to stay put, Erik strides away, his long tail trailing behind him as he leaves her alone in the nursery. Back in the dining room, the earlier interrogation about human-dragon physical compatibility continues to echo in the prince's mind. Erik contemplates the technical definition of a consummated union, recalling formal descriptions of deep interpersonal rituals he read in books. Left alone in the quiet nursery, the bride notices a strange, rhythmic vibration coming from one of the massive eggs. Suddenly, the egg begins to rattle violently against its pedestal, signaling an imminent and unexpected birth. The bride watches in shock as the nursery eggs begin to rattle violently. She lunges forward, catching a falling egg just before it hits the floor. She stares in confusion as the two eggs seem to clash in her arms. Softening her expression, she looks down at them with a gentle smile. The restless eggs finally settle together on the soft rug. She reaches out to soothe the trembling shells with a light touch. Dipping her fingers into a bowl, she prepares to apply nourishing oil. She reassures the bouncing eggs that she will take care of them. Suddenly, a surge of purple energy erupts from her hand upon contact. In a distant study, the room is cluttered with ancient scrolls and research. Rudi lies across a desk, venting his frustrations about his lonely status. He jokingly considers following the prince's lead by kidnapping a bride. Rudi leans on Anthony, expressing his desire for a family of his own. Anthony stares back, completely unimpressed by his friend's whining. With a sharp snap, Anthony initiates a magical seal to end the conversation. A golden light envelops Rudi as he realizes a spell is being cast. The magic forces Rudi to revert into his small, childlike dragon form. Anthony mocks him, noting he is far too young for such adult ambitions. Tears well up in the young dragon's eyes from the stinging insult. He screams in a fit of rage as Erik enters the room for a meeting. Rudi lunges at Anthony's head while Erik watches the petty squabble. Anthony reflexively catches the boy by his tail mid-air. He dangles Rudi upside down, telling him to behave and get dressed. Erik ignores the chaos and asks how to properly fulfill his marital duties. Anthony warns that a human union might fail to produce any heirs. He looks up from his book, emphasizing the high stakes of Erik's choice. A massive dragon eye looms behind him, signaling the elder's looming judgment. Back at the nursery, the purple flames begin to burn the precious eggs. The bride screams in horror as she realizes the magic is out of control. A flurry of books and papers scatter through the air as the tension in the library reaches its breaking point. Erik loses his cool, pinning Anthony against the wall and demanding answers as the advisor gasps for air. The prince considers a ruthless solution, offering to hunt down and capture Pearl's family since they treated her so poorly. Erik's gaze hardens as he realizes that simply keeping her here won't be enough to truly secure her heart. Back in the nursery, a trembling Pearl counts the damage, her finger hovering over yet another hairline fracture on the shells. Overwhelmed by the scale of the disaster, she collapses onto the table, certain that her life is forfeit. The heavy thud of boots echoing down the hallway signals that she is no longer alone. Her heart skips a beat as she looks up, wide-eyed with fear at the thought of being caught in the act. Panicked, she scrambles to hide the evidence, but there is nowhere left to run. A single tear wells up in her eye, reflecting the sheer terror of her precarious situation. Erik suddenly appears, kneeling beside her, and gently cupping her face to understand the source of her distress. He looks past her, his eyes landing on the precious dragon eggs that are now covered in jagged cracks. Instead of showing anger, he pulls her into a fierce embrace, vowing to eliminate anyone who caused her such pain. Pearl remains frozen in his arms, wondering if this protective display is a genuine comfort or a veiled threat. The silent, broken shells on the floor serve as a grim reminder of the magical accident she can't explain. She clutches her skirts tightly, haunted by memories of her mother's voice calling her a coward. With a shaky hand, she presents the damaged egg to Erik and begs for his forgiveness. Erik stares at the cracks with a puzzling lack of concern, as if the nursery's fate is secondary to his bride's mood. He leans in close, his presence commanding her full attention as he questions why she is even apologizing. Pearl reaches out to stop him as he pokes at the fragile shell, terrified it will shatter completely. She draws the egg back into her lap, cradling it with a maternal instinct she didn't know she possessed. Erik's piercing blue eyes narrow as he observes her intense devotion to the unhatched creature. He recalls the ancient tome Anthony provided, which holds the technical secrets to understanding human bonds. The text explains that humans require physical confirmation of love, a concept entirely foreign to his dragon nature. He admits his jealousy, realizing he has never received such a tender embrace from her himself. He pulls her closer, his gaze locked onto hers as he attempts to bridge the gap between their species. His touch lingers as he whispers for her to wait for the future he has planned. Erik leans down to seal his promise, vowing to give her the ultimate gift she deserves. Pearl gasps as the proximity between her and the dragon prince becomes overwhelmingly intense. She frantically gestures toward the runaway egg, her mind reeling from the chaotic turn of events in the nursery. Erik's brow furrows in frustration, demanding to know why she's preoccupied with an unhatched creature instead of the man standing right before her. The atmosphere shifts as Erik clings to her with a sudden, possessive need for her undivided attention. He commands her to look only at him, leaving Pearl trembling as she processes his unpredictable and volatile behavior. Without another word, he leads her out of the room to begin a much-needed change of scenery. As they depart, the echoes of their footsteps fade against the cold, ornate stone of the palace corridor. Elsewhere, a shadowy figure looms over a cracked egg, whispering of a dark plan to drain the human's power dry. Back in the safety of the chambers, Pearl stares in shock at the ornate dagger being offered to her as a gift. Erik leans in, promising to hunt down a legendary dwarf to forge a better blade if this weapon doesn't meet her standards. Pearl tentatively reaches out, her fingers brushing against the cold, intricate hilt of the weapon. She looks up at Erik, wondering if this strange, luxurious life is nothing more than a fleeting dream. Surrounding her are piles of shimmering jewels and fine silks, far beyond anything she ever owned in her past life. Despite his kindness, a lingering fear of the dragon's true nature haunts the back of her mind. She grips the handle of the dagger tightly, searching for a spark of true sincerity in her captor's eyes. With a trembling voice, she asks for confirmation that this weapon is truly intended for her to keep. Erik's gaze remains fixed on her, his blue eyes piercing through her layers of uncertainty. He instructs her to turn around, guiding her through the room with a surprising amount of refined grace. Closing the distance, Erik studies her face with a level of focus that leaves her completely breathless. He places a steady hand on her waist, noting with a frown that her physical condition is still far too thin. A deep blush creeps across Pearl's face as she reacts to his direct and unexpected concern for her well-being. She reflects on the quiet moments they've shared, from simple meals to him sharing the castle's most guarded secrets. Erik takes it upon himself to personally adjust the delicate ribbons of her new gown, ensuring every detail is perfect. Under the watchful eye of the fairy Silly, Pearl begins to question if her role here is truly that of a sacrifice. Her eyes widen in a moment of pure realization as the Dragon Prince continues his meticulous task. Pearl wonders aloud what he is doing, clearly flustered by his hands-on approach to her wardrobe. She insists she can finish the dressing process herself, causing Erik to politely step back and give her space. Clutching her dress, she falls into a pensive silence, the weight of her hidden magical potential heavy on her heart. Erik looks down at her, his expression softening as he prepares to address her deepest, most lingering fears. He suddenly takes her hand, challenging her to attempt summoning the destructive black fire that resides within her. Pearl recoils in fear, terrified that her lack of control might lead to a catastrophic accident that hurts him. Erik pulls her close, promising that his dragon strength is more than a match for any flame she could ever release. Erik leans in close, his gaze intense as he urges Pearl to place her faith in him when her own confidence wavers. Pearl looks down, her voice trembling as she admits her trust in him, while struggling with her inner turmoil. She gestures helplessly, explaining that the volatile power within her is currently beyond her control. Erik remains undeterred, promising to stay by her side until the mysterious black flames manifest once more. A soft smile plays on Pearl's lips as she realizes the Dragon Prince is acting like a proud child, showing off his skills. Seeing her genuine expression, Erik's cold exterior softens, completely captivated by her sudden warmth. Pearl tentatively asks for a moment of privacy, hoping to change into her new attire without his watchful eye. After a few moments, her voice rings out from behind the screen, announcing that she has finished her preparations. Erik waits with bated breath, his eyes fixed on the entrance as he anticipates her reveal. The prince stands frozen, his breath hitching as the light catches his silver hair in the quiet room. Pearl steps forward in a stunning new gown, her beauty radiating as she seeks his honest opinion on the look. Erik is momentarily speechless, his hand hovering in midair as he processes the sight before him. Clearing his throat, Erik suggests they return to the bedroom to finalize the urgent wedding arrangements. He observes her closely, noting how the elegant, simpler design seems to suit her personality perfectly. A dark memory flashes through his mind, contrasting her current grace with the blood-stained visions of her past. Erik remains silent for a moment, his brow furrowed as he contemplates the fragility of her current state. He finally asks if she truly prefers this more modest style of clothing over the extravagant options. Pearl confirms her preference, but adds that she is willing to wear whatever he finds most suitable for his bride. She offers a sincere compliment, telling him that his natural radiance far outshines any jewelry or fine silks. The unexpected praise hits Erik like a physical bolt to the heart, leaving him completely dazed. Outside, the gentle rustle of leaves provides a peaceful backdrop to the unfolding drama within the palace. A triumphant smirk crosses Erik's face as he realizes his efforts to impress her are actually working. Driven by a new sense of urgency, the prince discards his human garments, ready to take flight. His powerful frame begins to shimmer as the dragon's primal energy surges through his body. With a thunderous roar, Erik shifts into his massive draconic form and soars into the sky. His panicked subordinates watch from below, realizing they have no hope of restraining the prince in his current state. The blonde-haired noble shouts in frustration, knowing they must track down the human girl before things escalate. Meanwhile, in the human realm, a group of high-ranking nobles gathers to discuss the perceived disgrace of the bride. A noblewoman sneers behind her fan, lamenting the rumors that have tarnished their family's reputation. They prepare to commence a solemn ritual, treating Pearl as if she has already passed away. Standing before the congregation, the lead official suggests they skip the formalities and move straight to the final blessing. The guests whisper amongst themselves, heartlessly speculating that Pearl's soul has already been condemned. Suddenly, the heavy doors of the sanctuary begin to creak open, interrupting the morbid ceremony. Firm footsteps echo through the hall as a mysterious figure strides confidently into the room. The crowd turns in collective shock, their whispers dying down as they face the newcomer. Accompanied by a group of armed guards, a scared young man enters to defend his sister's honor. With a piercing gaze, he challenges the entire assembly, demanding to know who dared to declare her dead. Pearl stares at the grand ceiling, wondering why she is being locked away. She bows her head in sorrow, feeling the weight of her isolation. A shimmering blue barrier traps her within the ornate chamber. Erik turns his back, ordering her to stay put for her own safety. Pearl's eyes widen in shock at the sudden restrictive magic. She reaches out, her hand nearly touching the cold energy of the cage. Sudden, blistering flames erupt in her mind, triggering a dark memory. Media violently seizes Pearl's hair, her face contorted with jealous rage. Pearl endures the assault, confused by the fury over a simple letter. High society women sneer, mocking Pearl as nothing but a pretty vase. She watches as the heir to the throne chooses another for the dance. A young guard named Jacob breaks her solitude, offering his hand. In her nervousness, Pearl clumsily steps on her partner's foot. She looks up, mortified and offering a frantic apology. Jacob introduces himself with a gaze that promises he won't forget her. A torch burns brightly, signaling the punishment she faced for Jacob's letter. Present-day Pearl sits alone, realizing her current cage feels all too familiar. Her eyes reflect a deep, lingering sadness from her past traumas. She recalls Ludi's claim that only she can truly sway Erik's heart. Ludi insists that Erik's obsession is actually a form of protection. A carriage travels through the city, unaware of the impending chaos. Media observes with a sly grin as the now famous Sir Jacob arrives. Jacob strides past her without a glance, his focus elsewhere. He stares at Pearl's portrait, vowing to slay the dragon and reclaim her. The Duke promises wealth and royal favor for Pearl's successful return. Jacob rejects the gold, demanding Pearl herself as his ultimate reward. A noblewoman grits her teeth, fuming at the bold demand. The carriage speeds along the stones as the atmosphere shifts. A massive dragon descends from the clouds, targeting the travelers below. The beast slams into the earth, shattering the ground with immense force. Panicked citizens flee as the dragon's shadow engulfs the entire street. The scene opens in a tranquil garden where vibrant flowers bloom under a clear sky as a blue butterfly flutters. Pearl awakens in this serene paradise, her eyes wide as she tries to process the sudden change in atmosphere. Still shaken from her recent ordeal, she admits that a terrifying nightmare had been haunting her thoughts. Erik remains close, watching her carefully as she turns toward him with a look of lingering confusion. He provides a sense of security, assuring her that all sadness will vanish as long as they are together. The two sit amidst the greenery, with Erik suggesting they find something to eat to restore her strength. He then reveals that he has prepared a special surprise, urging her to take a look at what he brought. Suddenly, the peace is shattered by a violent magical explosion that rips through the air. The dust settles to reveal Medea, who has been brutally thrown onto the grass at their feet. Medea glares upward, her face twisted in a mixture of pain and absolute hatred for her rival. Seeing Pearl, she lunges forward with a predatory snarl, her hand reaching out like a claw. Erik reacts instantly, delivering a powerful kick that sends the intruder flying backward with immense force. As Pearl stands her ground, the defeated woman collapses, her internal thoughts consumed by bitter jealousy. Erik turns his attention back to Pearl, granting her the opportunity to interrogate the captive. He maintains a cold demeanor, reminding Pearl that she still carries the weapon he provided for her protection. Pearl steps forward, her voice trembling slightly as she asks for news regarding her mother's safety. Medea spits out a venomous response, hurling vile insults at Pearl's mother with reckless abandon. She reveals a shocking betrayal, claiming Pearl's mother conspired to annul her engagement in favor of Sir Jacob. Erik's gaze hardens into a terrifying stare as he listens to the accusations of humiliation brought against his house. He reaches out to steady Pearl, his touch serving as a silent anchor amidst the verbal assault. With absolute conviction, he declares that Pearl is his bride and no other man shall ever claim her. Medea stares in disbelief, her mind reeling from the sight of the Dragon Prince's unwavering devotion. She breaks into a deranged laugh, accusing Pearl of forming a secret alliance with the dragonkind all along. In a final act of desperation, Medea lunges forward with a glowing violet ring clutched in her hand. A surge of dark energy erupts toward Pearl, catching her completely off guard as the deadly trap is sprung. Erik catches the glowing ring, identifying the lethal artifact known as Morker's Bane. Pearl recognizes the weapon from her father's texts, knowing it can vaporize a human instantly. Erik questions Pearl's hesitation, asking if she truly lacks the will to kill her mother's agent. With a swift motion, he redirects the dark energy back toward Medea. Anthony suddenly intervenes, blocking the lethal blast to save the woman. Erik glares with predatory intensity at the knight who dared to interfere. Anthony argues he is only preventing a slaughter from occurring right before Pearl's eyes. Unmoved, Erik sends Anthony crashing into the dirt with a single, violent strike. The redhead rushes in, desperate to protect the garden from the escalating brawl. Erik commands his subordinate to step aside or face his wrath. The redhead pleads with Pearl, insisting only she can restrain the Dragon Prince. Pearl cries out for Erik to stop as he prepares a finishing blow. The sudden silence leaves Pearl trembling as the dust settles. The companions lie scattered across the grass, defeated by Erik's overwhelming power. Medea remains collapsed on the ground, barely clinging to life. Pearl feels a strange relief that her would-be assassin survived the encounter. The redhead reassures her that her kindness is a sign of noble education, not weakness. Pearl listens quietly, processing the vast cultural gap between them. He explains that dragons live by conquest and survival rather than human laws. Pearl steels her resolve, promising herself she will no longer be a victim. The group prepares to depart depart, leaving the defeated Medea behind in the flora. The redhead darkly remarks that death is a reward the wicked don't deserve. Later, the setting shifts to the quiet comfort of the palace dining hall. The group gathers for a meal, the previous violence replaced by a domestic atmosphere. Pearl brushes off Erik's demand to be fed, teasing him to use his own hands. She tenderly wipes a stray mark from Erik's cheek as they eat. Anthony observes her, impressed by how naturally she fits into their world. Erik smiles, convinced his harsh methods were necessary to secure her place. Memories of Medea's claims about the engagement and a man named Jacob resurface. Pearl notices a sudden, dark shift in Erik's demeanor. Erik grips his cutlery with bone-crushing force, demanding to know who Jacob is. In the quiet of the kitchen, Pearl focuses on her preparations, telling her tiny companion to be patient as the meal isn't quite ready yet. The little dragon cannot wait, however, lunging forward to snag a piece of raw meat right off the counter. Erik suddenly appears to intervene, lifting the creature while explaining that raw meat is the natural preference for their kind. His attention then shifts toward Pearl, bluntly stating that he is just as hungry as the pet. Pearl attempts to maintain order by offering him a spoonful of food, clearly irritated by his lack of decorum. Erik leans in with an intense gaze, making it clear that a simple taste of the meal won't be enough to satisfy him. He takes charge of the situation by lifting Pearl up, signaling a shift in the evening's priorities. Pearl finds herself placed onto the table as Erik looms over her, his focus entirely locked on his bride. He adjusts his collar with a determined look, ready to claim the reward he believes he has earned. The prince moves in to discuss the finer details of his request, leaving Pearl momentarily stunned by his sudden proximity. He plants his hand firmly on the table surface, ensuring she remains the sole focus of his attention during their negotiation. The little dragon watches the escalating intensity from the floor, unsure of how to react to the shift in mood. It watches with wide eyes, trying to process the complex social dynamics unfolding before it. Erik pulls Pearl into a close embrace, emphasizing that he has no intention of waiting any longer for her full cooperation. Despite the small dragon's presence, Erik remains fully committed to his persuasive efforts. Deciding the kitchen is no longer the place for this private discussion, Erik hoists Pearl into his arms to relocate. He walks with purpose toward the private chambers, leaving the confused creature to follow in his footsteps. The little dragon trails behind as Erik carries Pearl through the threshold of the bedroom. The heavy door suddenly slams shut, officially ending the public portion of their evening. Now completely excluded, the little dragon stands in the hallway, letting out a bewildered chirp at its sudden solitude. Pearl trembles, fearing Erik's lethal intent toward Jacob. She desperately begs him to halt his aggressive pursuit. Erik's gaze sharpens as he questions if her pleas are for another man's sake. Pearl quickly dismisses the rumors, claiming they must be a lie. A blonde official intervenes, suggesting a fairy be sent for surveillance. He explains that noble engagements are serious matters that require proof. Tracking Jacob is simple since he serves as a prominent knight captain. The advisor urges Erik to remain composed despite the potential betrayal. He smirks, suggesting they wait for the perfect moment to strike. The scene shifts to the quiet luxury of the private chambers. Erik holds Pearl close, demanding her absolute and undivided loyalty. Noticing blood in his hair, Pearl offers a professional grooming session. Erik's eyes sparkle with unexpected delight at her gentle proposal. He prepares for the treatment, revealing his human form under the moon. Pearl observes his smooth skin, noting the lack of dragon scales. She carefully applies oil to maintain his long, silver hair. Pearl realizes the fearsome prince is actually quite simple to manage. They share a quiet moment of technical care in the moonlit room. Later, a vibrant butterfly flutters through the palace gardens. Pearl vents her frustrations about Erik's restrictive rules while outdoors. Unbeknownst to her, Erik watches her from the distance. He scowls, clearly irritated by her desire for independent activities. Memories of her tending to others spark a flash of jealousy. Erik observes her from the balcony, struggling with his possessive nature. The advisor maintains a polished, formal appearance during the transition. Pearl spots Erik's sour mood and considers a more diplomatic approach. Erik suddenly pulls her toward him to assert his presence. He demands she compare his beauty to the nature surrounding them. A butterfly rests on him as he forces Pearl to focus solely on him. Erik looms behind Pearl with a possessive air, his tail swishing as he claims her as the only thing more beautiful than the butterfly. The romantic tension is shattered when a messenger rushes in, frantically reporting that the Lycans and rogues are launching a fresh invasion. Erik prepares to depart for the front lines, leaving Pearl with a magical butterfly as he promises his absence will only be brief. Finding herself suddenly alone in the vast estate, Pearl gazes toward the front gates, realizing the castle has been completely emptied of its guards. Her gaze softens as she contemplates her situation, caught between the dragon's intense affection and her own desire for autonomy. Within her eyes, a spark of realization flickers as she considers the strange, childlike nature hidden beneath Erik's intimidating exterior. She wanders through the silent, moonlit corridors of the castle, trying to shake off the unsettling thoughts of her draconic captor. A sudden, ghostly voice calling her name echoes through the hall, causing Pearl to freeze in her tracks. She turns her attention to a massive portrait on the wall, her heart racing as the silence of the room is broken. Pearl's eyes widen in sheer disbelief as she realizes the figure within the oil painting is actually speaking directly to her. A hand emerges from the canvas, offering a glass of wine in a surreal invitation that would be impossible if Erik were still around. Not taking any chances, Pearl draws a hidden blade, her instincts screaming at her to stay calm despite the supernatural encounter. She levels her weapon at the portrait of the blonde woman, who remains eerily composed while claiming that Erik's love is the only thing keeping Pearl safe. Pearl reflects on the weight of that love, knowing she is like a fragile butterfly that could be crushed by the dragon's power at any moment. Suddenly, the floor beneath her feet erupts in a blinding light, signaling the activation of a powerful teleportation circle. The woman in the painting offers a sinister parting smile, revealing that her descendant is now summoning Pearl to an unknown destination. Pearl screams in terror as the golden teleportation circle erupts beneath her feet, consuming her in a blinding light. She is violently hurled through a dimensional rift, plummeting toward a forest floor with a bone-jarring crash. Dazed and disoriented, she quickly realizes the portrait's trap has warped her directly into the heart of a chaotic battlefield. Her survival instincts flare as she senses a massive, predatory shadow looming directly behind her. Nearby, Anthony and his red-haired comrade move stealthily through the brush, searching for their target while keeping their voices low. A chilling howl echoes through the trees, confirming that the Lycan forces are closing in on their position. The red-haired man expresses his grim concern, doubting if the girl they summoned will even survive the transition. Anthony narrows his eyes, noting that the heavy scent of blood in the air has become localized and incredibly thick. The two men burst into a clearing and freeze, completely stunned by the carnage before them. They find Pearl standing atop the massive, broken corpse of a Lycan, her hands stained with the blood of the beast she apparently slew. As the adrenaline fades, Pearl's eyes clear and she looks down at her own hands in utter bewilderment. Anthony wastes no time, grabbing her and explaining that Prince Erik has lost his mind and she is the only one who can reach him. Pearl can barely let out a gasp of confusion before she is whisked away toward the center of the conflict. They land on a rocky overlook where Anthony points toward the valley floor, indicating Erik's current position. From their vantage point, they witness Erik engulfed in a terrifying aura of raw, jagged energy as he rampages through the enemy. Anthony instructs Pearl to call out to him immediately, emphasizing that she must use only his name, without any formal titles. Taking a shaky breath, Pearl screams Erik's name at the top of her lungs, desperate to break his trance. Erik whips his head around, his face splattered with blood and his eyes burning with a feral, unrecognizable rage. Pearl stares back in horror, realizing the man she loves has been replaced by a mindless engine of destruction. With a thunderous roar, Erik leaps across the battlefield toward them, leaving a trail of shattered earth in his wake. The rescuers panic as they realize Erik isn't coming to be saved, he's coming to attack. Anthony shouts for everyone to move, but Pearl is paralyzed as the prince descends on them like a vengeful shadow. Before anyone can intervene, Erik's blood-stained hand lunges forward to strike at Pearl's throat. Anthony and his companion watch in absolute terror, certain they have just sent the girl to her death. Erik snarls that she is nothing but a cruel illusion, his fingers tightening as he prepares to crush the vision. Suddenly, a massive explosion of dark energy erupts from the contact, sending Pearl flying backward into a nearby stream. Erik freezes as the black flames dissipate, his expression shifting from murderous rage to a dawning, horrific realization. Pearl splashes into the shallow water, her body trembling and her clothes soaked from the violent impact. Erik stands over her, his eyes wide with shock as he finally recognizes that the woman bleeding before him is real. He stares into her eyes, the red mist finally clearing from his vision as his true consciousness returns. Overwhelmed by the weight of his actions, Erik looks down at her with profound regret and begs for her forgiveness. Anthony surveys the aftermath of the battle, noting that despite the danger, the team must remain vigilant at the border. He explains that since the protective ward is currently recharging, Pearl must remain under their direct supervision for her own safety. Pearl can only offer a quiet nod of agreement as she tries to process the weight of the chaotic events. Erik draws her near, his voice low and urgent as he seeks the one thing he fears he's lost: her forgiveness. Stunned by his sudden vulnerability, Pearl struggles to find the right words to bridge the emotional gap between them. He cradles her face with a gentleness that stands in stark contrast to the violence of the battlefield. Surrounded by the rippling water, the two share a moment of quiet, intense focus on one another. When he questions her silence, Pearl's panicked reaction shows just how overwhelmed she feels by his proximity. She realizes that explaining the true depth of her feelings is a task far more daunting than any physical battle. Erik humbles himself, leaning his head on her as he admits that understanding human emotion is a skill he has yet to master. Finally leaving the chilling depths of the water, The pair makes their way back toward the safety of solid ground. Anthony provides immediate technical assistance, using a specialized drying spell to restore Pearl's comfort and warmth. Pearl watches as Erik assumes his role as a cold, rational leader, commanding the absolute respect of every soldier present. Her mind drifts to the future, realizing she must reach out to Jacob before he makes a reckless mistake on her behalf. The group eventually settles into a secure camp area filled with the essential supplies and spoils of their campaign. Pearl finds herself standing amidst a mountain of glittering treasure, though her mind is far from the wealth surrounding her. She notices Erik's hair has become a tangled, burnt mess, a physical reminder of the intense heat of the conflict. Comparing his grumpy expression to a bristling cat, she kindly offers to help him tidy up his appearance. Erik concedes to her request, sitting down and allowing her to take full charge of his grooming. Realizing the damage to his locks is too severe for a simple comb, Pearl prepares to use more precise tools for the task. She retrieves a pair of golden scissors, ready to carefully remove the singed ends of his hair. As she stands behind him, the mirror reflects a moment of absolute trust, where the powerful prince leaves himself completely vulnerable to her touch. She begins the delicate process of the trim, noting how the recent ordeal has visibly drained his usual vitality. With a steady hand, she snips away the remnants of the black flames, marveling at his calm and patient demeanor. Erik's piercing gaze remains fixed on her, tracking every movement of her hands as she works. When she finally confirms her forgiveness, the lingering tension in the room begins to dissipate. He leans in close, shifting the conversation to his exhaustion and the lack of a proper meal for the day. A playful bicker breaks out as Erik expresses his childish jealousy over her divided attention during the war. He pulls her into a firm embrace, seeking the emotional reassurance of her presence after the day's trauma. Surrounded by a symbolic shower of petals, Erik reaffirms his unwavering devotion and his promise to protect his bride. The peaceful atmosphere inside the tent is suddenly shattered by a suspicious rustling sound coming from just outside. Erik flings the flap open, catching two startled boys who were caught eavesdropping on their private conversation. After dealing with the intruders, Erik peers into the darkness of the camp to ensure no one else is lurking nearby. Pearl watches him from the shadows of the tent, her heart racing as she senses the growing tension in the air. A sudden wave of dread washes over her, as if a dark premonition is beginning to take root in her mind. She is momentarily haunted by a terrifying vision of monstrous wolves closing in on her from all sides. Pearl gasps for air, her eyes wide with shock as the nightmare feels far too real to ignore. She looks up to see a radiant light, desperate for any sign of safety in the middle of the night. Sensing her fear, Erik pulls her into a firm embrace and vows that he will never leave her side to protect her. The peace is short-lived as a massive claw strikes the ground, signaling a brutal enemy ambush on the perimeter. Erik quickly shifts into combat mode, ordering Pearl to stay hidden and safe within the confines of the tent. She calls out his name in a desperate plea for him to be careful as he rushes toward the sound of battle. Outside, a disgruntled warrior confronts Erik, accusing him of failing his responsibilities as a dragonborn during this crisis. The man aggressively demands that Pearl be handed over if Erik is unable to fulfill his sacred duty to their kind. Pearl watches from her hiding spot as Rhodey approaches, urging her to stay low while the chaos unfolds. Rhodey attempts to calm her nerves, insisting that Erik's power is unmatched by anyone else in their entire generation. The mention of their generation piques Pearl's curiosity, making her realize how little she truly knows about their lineage. She questions Rhodey about why the dragon eggs have remained dormant for so long without hatching. Rhodey's expression darkens as he reveals the tragic truth: they are missing the essential dragon's flame. Pearl pushes for more answers, realizing that the history books have omitted the true nature of dragon reproduction. She recalls a cryptic image of a divine union, wondering if this secret is the reason behind her initial kidnapping. Suddenly, a ferocious beast lunges through the air, its roar echoing through the camp as it targets them. Pearl is thrown into a panic as the creature's shadow looms over her, threatening to tear her away. Erik intervenes with lethal precision, landing a powerful strike that sends the massive wolf reeling backward. Watching him fight with such ferocity, Pearl is once again struck by the intensity of his devotion to her safety. Despite the blood staining his face, Erik stands tall, his gaze fixed on any remaining threats in the area. As the dust settles, the camp is littered with the fallen remains of the raiders, marking a decisive victory for the Dragon Prince. Later, Pearl observes the camp residents weeping over their lost riches, finding their grief over gold quite misplaced. She remarks to Erik how pathetic it is to mourn material wealth when they have survived something far worse. Erik offers a rare, gentle smile, confessing that his only concern is the treasure he is currently looking at. A soft blush creeps onto Pearl's cheeks as she realizes the depth of his feelings for her. Erik leans into her touch, asking if she can once again help him tidy his disheveled hair. Pearl gazes into his eyes, understanding that beneath his cold exterior lies a man who truly relies on her presence. The silver moon hangs high above the clouds, casting a serene glow over the silent landscape. Under the flickering campfire light, Erik pulls Pearl into a sudden, protective embrace. In a moment of quiet intensity, their faces draw close as the world around them fades away. As Erik finally pulls back, Pearl catches her breath, stunned by the sudden rush of emotion. Wide-eyed and searching for answers, Pearl asks him why he chose that moment for such a gesture. Erik meets her gaze with a soft look, reminding her that she had been asking for a reward. He turns toward the horizon, his long silver hair catching the light as he prepares for the road ahead. A week later, the skies are filled with the majestic silhouettes of a dragonkin patrol. Standing amidst the ruins of a cenotaph, Erik confirms that their previous attacker has already passed on to the nether. He explains that their ancestors guide the fallen to the next world, though some souls remain restless. Resting on a stone slab, Pearl curiously asks how long a dragon can actually live. Erik looks away pensively, admitting that his own origin and age have long been forgotten. Pearl reaches out to touch his hair, sensing the weight of the centuries he has endured. Realizing the hour is late, Erik stands up and suggests they begin their journey back. Pearl nervously clutches her skirt, her mind racing with a new, heartwarming idea. With a bright smile, she proposes a joint birthday celebration featuring a cake she'll bake herself. Erik agrees to the plan, promising to find a gift that will truly please her. He gallantly offers his hand to help her down from the high stone ledge. For a moment, Pearl recalls the dark, lonely birthdays of her past spent in isolation. Now, Erik carries her through a field of blooming flowers, symbolizing a fresh start. Pearl leans against him, deciding to fully embrace the affection he offers. Their footsteps crunch softly through the grass as they walk together in harmony. Erik looks ahead, casually mentioning that he'd like a similar cake for their future wedding. The sudden mention of a wedding sends a jolt through Pearl, leaving her momentarily speechless. Erik stops in his tracks, his tail flicking as he waits for her reaction. Pearl hugs him tightly from behind, worried that her silence might have upset him. Erik turns around and playfully suggests they adopt the lichen tradition of marking one another. He stares intensely into her eyes, contemplating the strange customs of the wolfkin. Startled by his bluntness, Pearl pulls back and offers a quick, nervous apology. Erik touches his chin, wondering why such primitive markings don't equate to the love he feels. He leans in close, his gaze fixed on her as he tries to understand these complex emotions. Pearl's face flushes with surprise as the distance between them vanishes once more. Erik gently cradles her face, his expression softening as he sees her distress. Seeing her on the verge of tears, he immediately pleads with her to remain calm. He reminds himself of his solemn vow to be her protector, not her source of fear. Erik pulls her close for a reassuring embrace, apologizing for his intensity and asking her to trust him. Pearl's delicate steps tread softly through the lush greenery as she wanders through the forest. Tensions boil over nearby as Jacob suggests the duo needs special training, only for Erik to sharply tell him to mind his own business. Jacob doesn't back down, warning Erik that the threat of extinction is looming for their kind. Hidden among the ancient trees, Pearl listens as the men discuss the heavy burden of her divine blessing and its vital link to the dragon's survival. Erik's temper flares when Jacob cruelly questions what other race would ever tolerate her unstable nature. From the shadows of the foliage, Pearl watches with a heavy heart as Erik demands that Jacob leave them immediately. Memories of a violent past resurface, filled with a bloodthirsty mob's desperate cries to slay the dreaded dragon. A hooded figure pleads with the High Commander, claiming their family won't survive if the beast remains. Clad in gleaming armor, the Duke remains cold and calculated while riding through the desperate crowd. He stares down the commoner, offering a grim invitation to personally accompany the knights and execute their enemy. Standing before the remains of a monstrous dragon, the Duke realizes that even the Emperor will eventually surrender his honor to the grip of fear. Behind the cold steel of a visor, the knight's true, piercing gaze remains fixed on his goal. In the quiet of the camp, the armored soldiers strategize on how they can finally reach Pearl. Returning to the present, Erik breaks the silence by asking Pearl if her teeth are still causing her pain from growing in. Pearl looks up in realization, finally understanding that his earlier intensity was just a clumsy attempt at worrying over her. With a gentle touch to her face, Erik offers a rare, soft apology for the discomfort he caused. Pearl observes him closely, knowing he is a man built for the battlefield rather than for comforting others. She realizes that while he lacks the silver tongue of a noble, his honest affection is the only thing that lets her vent her feelings freely. To help with her discomfort, Erik holds out a piece of jerky as a practical tool for her to grind her teeth on. As birds take flight against the horizon, the pair prepares to continue their trek. Erik carefully assists Pearl down the rocky terrain before pausing to tenderly fix her messy hair. He signals for them to move out, leading the way while Pearl follows closely behind. Pearl watches him with a tender expression, her heart swelling with an emotion she's only beginning to understand. She surprises him by playfully asking for a reward since he was kind enough to smooth her hair for her. Her eyes sparkle with genuine warmth as she gazes at the man who has become her protector. Erik lets out a rare, radiant smile as they walk hand in hand beneath the falling blossoms, finally finding a moment of pure joy. A haunting memory of a noble lady and her once spoiled pet flickers through Pearl's mind like a dark omen. A sudden spray of crimson stains her vision, signaling the violent end of a bond turned sour. The nightmare reaches a terrifying peak as Erik stands over her fallen form, his power feeling more like a threat than a sanctuary. Pearl jolts awake in a cold sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs as the horrific imagery of the dream fades. Even back in the safety of the manor, the lingering dread of Erik's true nature continues to haunt her every waking moment. She recalls the tension of their journey, specifically the moment they encountered a group of armed humans encroaching on dragon territory. Desperate to prevent a massacre, Pearl had clutched Erik's arm and pleaded for him to show mercy to her kin. But the dragon prince remained unmoved, his gaze icy as he declared that the intruders had sullied his sacred land. The realization of her own powerlessness in the face of his wrath leaves Pearl feeling hollow and deeply troubled. She descends the grand staircase alone, the silence of the palace echoing the growing emotional distance between her and her protector. Erik is waiting for her at the landing, his expression unreadable as he prepares to address her. In a rare display of effort to bridge the gap, he conjures a swarm of glowing blue butterflies to capture her fleeting interest. Pearl offers a soft, appreciative smile, finding a momentary spark of beauty in the magical gesture. Erik observes her closely, noting that his research suggests humans have specific ways of showing gratitude to those they care for. He leans in with a strictly professional curiosity, maintaining a focused and serious expression as he studies her reaction. Pearl freezes, her breath hitching as she navigates the confusing and tense boundaries of their current relationship. Abruptly ending the moment, Erik dismisses her with a cold reminder that her lingering anger over the human intruders is misplaced. When Pearl tries to assert her identity as a human, Erik quickly cuts her off with a firm and chilling rebuttal. He reminds her that he was the one who raised her, claiming she belongs to him alone and is nothing like the others. Their argument is interrupted by the spirited voice of Donna, whose consciousness resides within a grand, enchanted portrait. The spirit wastes no time scolding Erik for his past recklessness, reminding him the danger he previously put Pearl in. Pearl watches the painting in awe, wondering if the magic of this world allows all such portraits to come to life. Erik explains that Donna was an ordinary dragon who sacrificed her life force for the race, leaving a fragment of her soul behind. As Erik turns to leave, Pearl catches a glimpse of a hidden sorrow, wondering if he is still quietly grieving his lost kin. Suddenly, Erik shifts his focus to a massive, iridescent dragon egg, handling the fragile object with extreme precision. His gaze sharpens with a calculated intensity, revealing his absolute determination to see this task through. He works with a gruff efficiency, brushing off the importance of his actions while keeping a steady, careful hand. Pearl watches in confusion as he begins to handle the shell fragments, unsure of what he is trying to achieve. Panic sets in as she realizes the shell has cracked, fearing that her own unstable powers have caused a catastrophic accident. She desperately pleads with Erik to fix the damage, terrified that she has accidentally extinguished the hope of a new life. Erik looks back at her with a calm, almost amused gaze that stands in stark contrast to her spiraling fear. He leans over her to maintain his technical focus on the situation, while Pearl braces herself for a potential scolding. A sudden tapping at the window draws their attention as a tiny, winged messenger appears against the glass. The cheerful fairy delivered the incredible news. The dragon egg didn't break out of failure, it has finally hatched. A tiny, fragile dragon hatchling emerges from its shell, filling the room with a rare sense of wonder. Pearl gazes down at the creature with soft eyes, admitting she's never witnessed such a small whelp before. However, the atmosphere turns cold as Erik suggests a brutal method to keep the birth a secret from the other dragonkin. His advisor leans in with a twisted ambition, dreaming of the blood and riches they will seize across the continent with the new dragon. Pearl's heart sinks as she realizes these newborns are living beings just like her, not just tools for war. Erik's hand crackles with a dangerous, glowing energy that reflects his ruthless mindset. Desperate to stop the violence, Pearl reaches out and begs him to end the senseless cycle of killing on a whim. The advisor vanishes in a puff of smoke as Erik begins to wonder if Pearl is exerting too much influence over his choices. The subordinate quickly reappears, reminding Erik of the deep scars and pain Pearl caused him in the past. The tension peaks as the advisor warns that Erik still hasn't secured his birthright because of her previous actions. A sudden, violent impact shatters the stone wall as Erik's temper finally boils over. Erik pins his subordinate against the masonry, emphasizing his dominance and threatening a swift end to his life if he forgets his place. Left alone and trembling, Pearl hears a familiar voice in the air and wonders if her old ally, Jacob, has somehow returned. 2 weeks later, the landscape is buried under a heavy blanket of snow as the dragonkin move toward the warmer southern lands. While standing by the water, Pearl's eyes widen in disbelief as a face stares back at her from the ripples. Jacob's spectral image appears within the water, swearing a solemn oath to rescue her from her captors. Pearl collapses by the shoreline, her mind racing with the impossibility of this magical encounter. She leans closer to the surface, frantically whispering for him to hide before the other dragonkin detect his presence. Jacob's gaze hardens as he delivers a chilling command. She must use her black flames to end Erik's life. Overwhelmed by the dark suggestion, Pearl recoils in horror, unable to process the weight of such a betrayal. Erik trudges through the deep snow nearby, calling out for Pearl as he searches the perimeter of their camp. He finds her at the edge of a cave and informs her that they will only be resting in this location for a single night. Suddenly, Erik's expression shifts to one of sharp suspicion as he detects strange mana waves lingering in the air. He seizes Pearl's face with a firm grip, demanding to know if she was plotting an escape or speaking to an intruder. Hidden beneath the folds of her heavy winter cloak, Pearl's hand trembles as it finds the hilt of a concealed blade. Images of Jacob's request flash through her mind as she fights against the crushing pressure of Erik's interrogation. In a flash of desperate movement, Pearl draws the dagger and lunges at the prince, catching the powerful dragonkin completely off guard. Erik stares down, his face shrouded in shadow as he questions Pearl's lethal intentions. Pearl gazes up with tear-filled eyes, her hand frozen on the hilt of her dagger in a moment of paralyzing guilt. Erik shields his eyes in disbelief, his voice heavy with the weight of her betrayal. Pearl lunges forward not to strike, but to embrace him, desperately seeking a way to mend the fracture between them. She holds him close, weeping as she confesses that she could never truly follow through with the kill. Erik rests against her, asking why she chooses to stay instead of fleeing his presence. He looks at her with a softened expression, the scratch on his cheek a grim reminder of how close they came to tragedy. A cold command hangs in the air as he challenges her to prove her loyalty once and for all. Pearl closes the gap between them, sealing their complicated bond with a gesture of pure trust. They remain locked in a quiet embrace, the snowy woods falling silent around their shared breath. Pearl's eyes snap wide as a strange sensation begins to flow through her, catching her completely off guard. Erik's pupils sharpen into reptilian slits as a primal, draconic power suddenly ignites within his blood. A terrifying vision of a colossal dragon roars into existence, demanding that the pair fulfill their roles in the lineage. The prince suddenly doubles over, coughing violently as his body struggles to contain the surging energy. He looks at Pearl with a mixture of horror and realization, suspecting that the ancient legacy has finally awakened. Erik snarls in pain, yelling for her to get away before his losing battle for self-control puts her in danger. He clutches his head as the draconic instincts scream within him, desperate to claim what he believes is his. Pearl clings to his side, her face full of concern as she fails to grasp the internal war he is fighting. Erik squeezes his eyes shut, knowing that his presence is becoming a direct threat to the woman he loves. He pushes himself away with a pained grunt, forcing a distance between them that feels like a physical wound. Pearl reaches out, her voice trembling as she begs him not to abandon her in this moment of chaos. He casts one final, lingering look over his shoulder, his eyes filled with a tragic conflict he cannot voice. Pearl's hand remains outstretched toward the empty air, her heart breaking as she wonders why everyone eventually leaves. She stands solitary in the frozen landscape, watching the silhouette of the prince vanish into the distance. A heavy snowfall blankets the quiet forest, setting a somber tone for the morning. Pearl slowly stirs from her sleep, her hand brushing against the soft linens. She looks up at Erik, whispering his name as the memories of the night before flood back. Lying there, she reflects on the profound shift in their relationship and what it means to be lovers. A gentle smile touches her lips as she realizes how much he truly cares for her well-being. Erik notices she's awake and turns to her, breaking the morning silence. He stands tall and composed, asking her exactly what is weighing on her mind. Pearl's gaze lingers on him, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and affection. When she mentions the marks on his skin, he firmly declares his intention to keep them as a reminder of their bond. He pulls her into a protective embrace, whispering that she is the only one he desires. Looking into his eyes, Pearl bravely asks if he has finally found love for her. Despite his intensity, she can't help but wonder why he seems so deeply obsessed with her. Her heart is a tangled web of sympathy, fear, and growing devotion. She wraps her arms around him, finally admitting to herself that she has irrevocably fallen for him. Erik looks down at her, his expression unreadable and clouded with doubt. Suddenly, he pulls back, his aura flaring as he accuses her of not truly meaning those words. Pearl is left completely stunned, unable to comprehend his sudden coldness and rejection. Later, a carriage cuts through the frozen landscape as they continue their journey. Inside, Pearl is haunted by the confusion of Erik's abrupt change in temperament. Her thoughts are interrupted by the sound of a rowdy commotion outside the window. Peering out, she sees Erik being approached by a group of strangers on the road. A mysterious woman with pink hair and horns calls out to him with a sly grin. Pearl watches with growing anxiety, wondering who this intruder could possibly be. The woman moves in close, attempting to use her charms to ensnare the dragon prince. Panicked, Pearl reaches out, fearing that Erik might succumb to the stranger's influence. However, Erik remains completely immune, harshly rebuking the succubus for her pathetic attempt at manipulation. The intruder's eyes flare with a dangerous, vengeful light after being rejected. Pearl steps out from the carriage, her face etched with worry for Erik's safety. Her eyes widen as she notices a strange shimmer in the air around them. Erik screams for Pearl to stay back as a dark shadow looms over the scene. Suddenly, Pearl is thrown to the ground by an invisible, crushing force. A violent strike of dark energy slashes across the air, catching Erik off guard. Pearl watches in horror as Erik is wounded, the scene descending into chaos. She realizes with a shock that the enemy is using her own appearance to sow confusion. Erik glares at the double, demanding to know if she really thought such a simple deception would work. The air is thick with tension as Erik demands to know exactly what lies the succubus planted in Pearl's mind. Amidst the snowy clearing, the defeated assassin lies motionless while Pearl struggles to process the chaotic aftermath of the ambush. Erik grows increasingly impatient, questioning why she remains silent instead of defending herself against his suspicions. Desperation fills Pearl's voice as she tearfully insists she has never encountered those monsters before this moment. Erik turns a cold shoulder, accusing her of being enamored with his royal appearance rather than his true, volatile nature. Refusing to let him pull away, Pearl embraces him from behind and lists all the ways she has cared for him beyond mere looks. She rests her head against his back, her face flushing as she pours out her genuine devotion to him. Erik remains still, forced to confront the sincerity of her confession despite his own inner turmoil. A subtle, knowing smile finally tugs at his lips, hinting at a slight shift in his guarded heart. Elsewhere, Jacob consults with a mysterious hooded figure regarding the difficult search for a magical medium to complete their spell. Standing firm in the pouring rain, Jacob maintains his composure as his subordinates scramble to follow his latest orders. Dark memories of the Medici family's cruel eldest son surface, recalling a history of arrogance and the abuse Pearl once suffered. Jacob issues a stern command to his capital contacts to dig up the truth behind the temple incident from years ago. A heavy sense of dread washes over him as he realizes the stakes of their current investigation are rising rapidly. Pearl reflects on her volatile magic, terrified by her inability to control the destructive black flames during the heat of battle. As the journey continues on horseback, Erik's companions question the state of his wounds and the inheritance of his draconic power. Anthony lashes out in frustration, arguing that the ancient prophecy is the only reason Pearl hasn't been eliminated yet. Erik delivers a swift, powerful strike that knocks the arrogant challenger clean off his horse to silence the insult. Despite the heavy blow, Anthony remains fixated on the mystery of why Erik is still shielding the girl from their wrath. A manic realization dawns on Anthony as he wipes blood from his face, confirming that Erik has truly claimed the draconic legacy. Later, Erik seeks a moment of peace in a steaming spring, wondering how much Pearl actually heard of the earlier argument. His draconic senses sharpen as a spectral swift bird descends from the trees, capturing Pearl's delighted attention. Beneath the water's surface, a powerful scaly tail coils around Pearl to guide her into the spring for a necessary healing session. The water splashes as they converge, focusing entirely on the specialized magical ritual required to mend Erik's internal injuries. Gazing deeply into his eyes, Pearl reaffirms that her love belongs to both the man and the dragon he has become.